Hi, this is Jason Baker, and welcome back to our Week 9 lecture. I'm going to ramp up the lecture by launching a couple CloudFormation stacks. Now, you've already got a little bit of experience launching stacks and terminating stacks, but now that you have a better understanding of how we actually build CloudFormation stacks, we can take a look at the actual stack code and have a better understanding of what the stack is actually doing. I'm going to start by launching a very simple stack which we use to create an S3 bucket. And here's the S3 web endpoint address for this particular template. But before I launch it, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual template file. And I'm going to do that by just pulling it up in a code editor. So here's the CloudFormation template file, the S3 bucket.json. You see that all of the different sections in the template are wrapped in an object. So you see that like the first character or the last character in this template are these curly brackets. Those wrap all the different sections of the document. Each section of the document is delimited from other sections using a comma. So we have this first section of the document, which is the AWS template format version. And then you see comma, and then the resources section. If there are other sections, then there will be a comma right here, and so on. In the resources section of the document, you see a single resource that's being defined called SCIS 665. This is an AWS S3 bucket resource, and it has a single property, which is a tags property, defining a key value pair. The environment is the key, and the value is test. And then we also see this metadata attribute. The metadata attribute on a resource allows you to add things like comments. And this is really helpful for documentation purposes if you're looking at this code later on and you're trying to figure out, well, what is that resource for? You can include this metadata attribute and specify a comment. This doesn't actually show up anywhere other than inside this code template. That's the S3 bucket template. Very, very small template, very, very simple. Let's go ahead and launch that template. I'm going to copy this S3 address here. And so I'm going to copy that. And we're going to go ahead. I've already logged into my AWS account, and I've selected the CloudFormation dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and create a new stack by clicking on the Create Stack button. And when it says choose a template, I can either upload a template. If I created a template locally, I could upload that. When I upload the template, it actually stores it in a temporary S3 bucket that it automatically creates. So ultimately, CloudFormation is always going to be pulling the template from some S3 bucket. Or I can just simply specify the S3 template URL, which is what I will do. I'm going to go ahead and, oh, by the way, if I wanted to edit this template in the designer, I could click on this link here and it would open up that the CloudFormation designer. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to click on next, and I can give this stack a name, and I'm just going to call it my bucket. That's going to be the name for my stack. All stack names must be unique in my account. That's very important. And remember, I'm launching this stack in North Virginia and US East 1. I click next. I can assign some tags to my stack. The stack is treated as a resource just like any other AWS resource. So I'm going to call it project and just give it some random name. There are other settings that I can configure here. One thing I should note is that by default, when you launch a CloudFormation stack, if AWS is not able to create some resource, if there's a problem that's encountered during the stack creation process, then CloudFormation will automatically roll back all of the resources that it created. In other words, it will actually go back and delete everything that it launched as part of that stack. So you could get like 99% of the way through launching all the resources in a stack and then encounter some sort of error, and CloudFormation will roll back all of those resources that it created. I should note that too that some resources take much longer to create than others. It only takes a few seconds to create a VPC or a subnet. It might take a couple minutes to create an EC2 instance. It can sometimes take 15 to 20 minutes to create a database. So some resources can take a very long time to create, and it's something you need to take into consideration. Your CloudFormation template in your stack could launch in like a minute. It could take 25 minutes to run your template, depending upon all the different resources that need to be created. Okay, I'm going to click next here at the bottom, and it's going to give me a review. Everything looks fine, so I'm going to go ahead and create the stack. Now, you see that the dashboard is telling me that the stack creation is in progress. I can look at the events tab and I can see the events. If I click on the refresh button, it tells me what it's doing. It's creating the S3 bucket. Click on refresh, and this should create the bucket pretty quickly. If I click on resources, it tells me all the resources that's creating as part of this template. If I provided input parameters, I could look at the input parameters on the parameters tab, and then the outputs tab would show me the outputs from that template. Okay, I click on refresh, and the stack is complete. Has completed the creation of my AWS bucket. And the logical idea of my bucket is just simply my bucket. What is the actual bucket address then? Is the bucket address my bucket? What do you think? Well, let's take a look. If I click on the S3 dashboard, you'll see that we've created a new bucket, and the bucket is called my bucket SCIS 665 then this sort of random string of characters. Well, why did it name the S3 bucket this way? Well, recall that every S3 bucket has to have a unique name. And if this name wasn't unique, then I would not be able to run or reuse this template multiple times, because every time I tried to launch a new stack using this template, that stack would refer to the same bucket name, and that bucket already exists, and it wouldn't be able to create a bucket which already exists, and the stack launch would fail. So what CloudFormation is doing is it's ensuring that my bucket name is an absolutely unique name. And that allows me to launch this template dozens or hundreds of times, and every time it runs, it creates a new unique bucket. Well, you might be asking yourself, like, well, how am I supposed to keep track of this bucket name? Well, you can do that by using an output parameter, and then using that output parameter to feed your application with the value of that bucket. So you deal with this all programmatically. So when I launch my templates, I don't care what the resource ID is or the bucket name or any of that stuff. I don't actually ever personally use that. I'm not really typing that stuff in. That's being used programmatically by my applications, and my applications are pulling that from the output section of my CloudFormation template. Now, if I click on my bucket stack and I look under outputs, there's nothing in there. Let's go ahead and change that. Let's add an output section to this document. And I have an example output section that we can add right here. So I'm going to copy this information, and we're creating a new section called the output section. So I got to separate it from the resources section using a comma. And then I'm just going to copy and paste this section into the document here. And I'm just taking a look to see if everything is matching up okay. Okay. So we have a new outputs section, and the output section is going to create an output called the bucket URL. Oh, this character got copied in kind of strange. That's why it was showing me that there was an error there. It shows me the output section. So we have an output called bucket URL, and the bucket URL has a value, which is the value of an attribute for this bucket, for this resource, SEIS 665. And that attribute is the website URL of the bucket. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and update this template. So I select my template and I do update stack. And this time, because I've modified the file locally on my system, I'm going to apply that change from my local system. And the way I do that is by browsing to my file. So I go to, let's see, where did I put that? Here's my S3 buckets. I just modified it. Open that up, and I'm going to click on next. And I can't change this. This is a stack that I'm updating, so I'm not going to change the name. I could add more tags. I could change some of these other properties. I'm not going to. I'm going to say next. And when I do that, when I do an update, CloudFormation is going to calculate if there's a change set. And it's looking to see if I want to change any of my existing resources. And if I want to change existing resources, it'll tell me what modifications are going to be made and whether or not that will result in the recreation, the termination and recreation of those resources. This change set is really important to take a look at. In this case, I'm not actually changing the S3 bucket, I'm just adding an output to the template. I go ahead and click update, and it tells me updates in progress and complete. It happens almost instantaneously because the change I'm making is so minor. Now when I go to the outputs section of the template, now you can see there's an output that's available to me called bucket URL. And here is the website URL for my bucket. That's my S3 bucket address, the URL version of the S3 bucket address. And so I could use this programmatically. I could use an API call from my application to programmatically determine what the bucket URL is for my bucket stack. And it would return this particular value. And then I could use that in my application. Okay. So you've seen how to create the stack, update the stack. Let's look at deleting it. We select the stack, click on Actions, and then say Delete Stack. And CloudFormation will go ahead and delete the stack. One thing I should note about S3 resources, you can't delete an S3 resource, an S3 bucket, if there are files in it. If there are any keys in that bucket, then you can't delete the resource by default. And if you try to delete it, then S3 or CloudFormation will actually give you a deletion error, and you have to go and like manually delete that S3 resource. Okay, let's look at another example. Something a little bit more sophisticated. In this example, we're going to launch a single EC2 instance into a VPC. And this VPC has this 10.0.0.0/16 network, and it has a public subnet, which has this /24 network partition. We're going to launch a web server into that subnet using this image ID, and we'll associate a security group with the web server. The security group will allow port 22 and 80 from anywhere. Let's take a look at this basic web server in VPC template. Okay, here's the template. We have our AWS template version. This template was actually created in the CloudFormation Designer, and so it includes this metadata section. You can just simply ignore this for now. This includes a bunch of metadata that's used by that designer tool, which again I don't personally use. The resources section of the template then contains all the different resources we want to create, beginning with the VPC called the class VPC. You can see that has a number of properties like the Cedar block. Here's our /16 network. It's got some tags, or it's got one tag. And then we have a public subnet resource. You can see the type is AWS EC2 subnet. Our /24 Cedar block is defined. We have a web server resource. It's an EC2 instance. For the instance type, we're using an input parameter called instance type. We've hard-coded the image ID, and in this case, we've hard-coded a key name. Generally, you don't want to hard-code a key name, and you'll see in the assignment that we use a different way we use a parameter to refer to the key name. So this template would be a problem for anybody but me to launch, because I'm the only one that has access to this key. That's another reason why you don't want to hard code keys in templates, because it makes them much less portable. We have, let's see, we have a web server security group that we're defining, so an EC2 security group. And you see the security group is associated with the class VPC, and so we're using that reference function. The security group has ingress rules. It has two ingress rules defined. One which is allowing port 80 from everywhere from the internet. The other which is allowing port 80 or port 22 from the internet, which again is not a good security practice. We would want to greatly limit who can access our EC2 instances via SSH. We define an internet gateway because, of course, you can't access an instance from the internet unless there's an internet gateway associated with the VPC. We have a routing table, a public routing table set up associated with our class VPC. All of these resources have a little bit of metadata associated with them, and that's because of this CloudFormation Designer tool, which was used to create this particular template. We have a public route, which is set up. It's a resource that defines a route within our routing table. So we reference our routing table, we reference our internet gateway, and we define a route which routes traffic destined to the internet through the internet gateway. We see subnet route table association that associates a routing table with a subnet. That's what it's doing. It's just making that association. Remember, We have to explicitly associate subnets with routing tables. And then we have two additional sections. We have the parameter section. We have the instance type. The default is T2 micro. We allow T2 micro or T2 small. And we have a key name parameter. Actually, we should be using this key name parameter within within our template here. So let's go up and we'll modify this template so that it's using that key name parameter. The key name parameter will automatically select all the different keys that are available in your account. Let's see, it was down up right here, web server. And our key name, we want this to be a reference. We're going to reference a input parameter value called key name. Use that as the value for the key. That makes this particular document much more portable. Okay, and the key name input parameter has a special type, which is this AWS EC2 key pair key name value. And again, this will automatically create a selection of the different keys that are available within our account. Very, very handy parameter type. And then finally, we have an outputs section. The outputs section has got one output, which is the URL, and that is based on an attribute, which is the web server public IP address. We're prepending or prefixing that value with HTTP://. So that's creating a string, which is HTTP:// public server IP address. Okay. And so let's go and launch this template in CloudFormation. We're going to go ahead and create our stack. And this time I'm going to choose a file because I've modified the file on my local workstation. I'm not going to use the one on S3 because I've changed it. And ultimately, again, when I say upload a template, it's going to upload it to a temporary S3 bucket, and CloudFormation is just going to pull that file I modified from that S3 bucket. I go ahead and click Next, and I give the stack a name, and we'll just call it my web server stack. My instance type, I can choose from the two different types. This is a constraint that was placed on this input parameter. I'll just leave it at T2 micro. And then that key name, remember that the key name is going to give me a drop-down list of all the keys are available in my account. I'm going to select a key from that list, click on Next, and I can tag my resource. And click on Next and go ahead and create. Now this one will take a little bit longer to create, and I can refresh and watch what it's doing while it's creating. Remember, I didn't tell it what order necessarily to create these resources. So CloudFormation sort of already knows the order in which it should create most of the resources in the template. It starts by creating the VPC, then it's creating an internet gateway, and it's going to associate the internet gateway with the VPC. It's creating a subnet, a routing table. It will try to create multiple resources in parallel. So it knows that in certain cases it needs to create resources in a specific order, and at other times it will just try to create a whole slew of resources in parallel to speed up the template launching process. You can see it's completed setting up the VPC, setting it up. Now it's going to create a security group, it's creating a routing table, routes, and so on. Now that all those infrastructure network pieces are in place, it's gone ahead and it's started to launch the EC2 instance. It's created the EC2 instance and should be finishing up pretty soon here. If I look in the resources section, you can see all the different resources defined in my template. Here are the logical IDs that you'll see in the template. Here are the physical Amazon resource IDs, which are actually created by Amazon for this particular stack. If I look at my parameters, you can see here are the input parameters that were used to create the stack. And now you can see that the stack is complete. If I look at the outputs section, you'll see that here's a URL. This is the output value from the stack. I'm not sure if this actually goes to something. Let's give it a shot. Oh, there we go. You've seen this particular AMI before. We've used this in the web server failover project. So it went ahead and launched my web server for me and provide me with a stack output that I could use for that stack. So very, very useful. And what you've seen me launch so far are very small, simple templates. Basically, anything you can imagine is possible with CloudFormation in terms of scale and complexity. I have developed templates that are like thousands of lines of code and creating hundreds of resources in orchestrating very, very complicated uh, cloud architectures. And all of that's done using code. All of it's completely automated. All of it's totally testable using an infrastructure pipeline. And CloudFormation and an infrastructure definition tool like CloudFormation makes all of that possible. One thing I should note before finishing the lecture um, is that CloudFormation is one of those tools where you don't just start like day one, sit down in front of a code editor and start typing out a bunch of code. Typically, what you're doing is when you're working on your CloudFormation template, you have CloudFormation documentation open in a web browser window, and it's next to your code editor. So as you're like creating resources and defining properties for resources, you're looking at the CloudFormation documentation for help and guidance. In this lecture presentation, I've included a couple different resources that you can look at. You can look at a YouTube video, which gives you some, insights on CloudFormation best practices. I've got a link to CloudFormation documentation and specifically to CloudFormation resource types, which is a section of the documentation that you'll spend a lot of time looking at to try to understand the different types of resources that are available.